Okay. Welcome, friends. This is my friend Daniel Pinchbeck. Daniel is an author of some very insightful and penetrating books, and I'd like you to share maybe a few of those a little later for us, please. And also is, I would say, a very grounded philosopher in the sense that his understanding of world dynamics and dynamics on many, many fronts is quite extraordinary. I really enjoy the breadth and the depth of your wisdom and your insight, but also you're very, from my experience, you care about the world. You want to see it. Your head's not just in the sky. You actually want to see real change happen on the planet. So thanks for being here, my brother. And thanks everyone for joining.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So I want to know, please, you know, there's so much going on right now on so many levels. What's calling your interest? Where's your attention and presence on right now?
Well, it hasn't really changed that much for a while. I mean, I wrote a book in 2017. I mean, I can very quickly run through my books. But the first book was Breaking Open the Head. It was about psychedelic shamanism. And I went through different visionary experiences in the Amazon and Africa with Iboga and Gabon, and visited the Mazatec Indians in Mexico and so on. Then I wrote a second book, 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, that was looking at the prophecies of ancient and indigenous cultures like the Maya and the Hopi, and correlating them with a lot of ideas from Western culture and so on. And in 2017, I wrote a book called How Soon Is Now, which was looking at the ecological crisis as a kind of collective rite of passage for humanity, and also proposing what would we have to change if we wanted to avert cat catastrophe, you know. So it's, you know, basically what I've developed. I mean, Buckminster Fuller was one big influence. So it's kind of a system design approach, thinking about the current civilization we inhabit as a system that's developed with its own kind of evolutionary trajectory over, you know, a number of centuries. And unfortunately, it's kind of reached the limit of what it can do for us in this present form, you know, because of the kind of nation state, you know, model, imperialism, capitalist economics, which, you know, require constant growth, even though we live on a finite planet with limited resources. So we're at a point where the system that got us so much benefit and allowed the population to grow so big and, you know, gave us all these incredible tools and cured all these diseases is almost like cannibalizing the world and us now. And we don't really know how to throw the off switch or the reset switch. And then actually it's quite interesting because the pandemic, in a sense, you know, people have been talking about it as a reset or a timeout. That's what a lot of ecological activists have been saying that we really needed, you know, for a long time now, that we needed, you know, a timeout. We needed a reset. You know, we needed something to happen that would allow us to rethink our direction. And then the question is really, you know, are we going to make use of this, you know, kind of crazy opportunity to make those types of changes, and how do we do it? You know, how do we plant a new flag on the horizon for people to go towards? So that's been, you know, what I've been interested in for many years. And that's kind of where my interest still lies.
Thanks, Daniel. You've shared quite a wide palette there of concerns that we need to address. From your understanding, your experience, what do you feel that we should be collectively focusing around? Like, we have this whole COVID experience. The world in some disjointed way has found a way to work together, or is aiming to work together. We're seeing what is working, what's not, where the breakdowns are, where there are successes. And I hope as a humanity that we're going to grow, and that if there's any other world level challenge that happens, that the chains, the connections, the relationships are strengthened and made more clear from this experience. I don't know if I'm dreaming about it, but do you think that that's a possibility, and that we actually are learning as a whole in all communities from this?
You know, I wish I could say unequivocally yes. I'm really not that convinced, because we have a, particularly in the US, but everywhere, we live in a very class stratified social system. And, what it looks like, the terrible consequences of the pandemic, may be that, that a lot of the poor people are sort of sacrificed through, starvation or through mass unemployment or, loss of housing. And, it's, however, yeah, I mean, that doesn't, it doesn't have to be the case, but it would require some really powerful interventions, like, which we're seeing in Europe. Like they gave people 90% of their income. They kind of kept all the people's employment in place. The U.S. chose a different strategy and has allowed 30 million people to become unemployed. South America is a mess. Countries like Peru have no resources for dealing with something like this. But anyway, but yeah, I mean, so let's go to the positive. What needs to be. We know that the IPCC, the UN panel on climate change said in 2018 that we only have 10 years to really, kind of radically change the direction of our civilization, or, it's basically going to be a real collapse. And that was 2 years ago, so we're 2 years in. And, we know the kind of things that we need to do. We need to sequester carbon. We need to move towards, regenerative farming, renewable energy, and it needs to happen in a systematic global way, very much, along the lines of probably what was outlined in the Green New Deal, that kind of idea, where essentially you're treating it like a war, or you're treating it like a collective emergency. Yes. That people have to make sacrifices for. And it could be that this COVID experience is like kind of a run up, to what we'll have to do for climate change.
Yes, a warm up.
A warm up, exactly. Yeah.
You diving into this personal question, how do you deal with this how does your psyche deal with the seeming impossibility of people don't even know their neighbors, let alone how can we come together as a unified world? It's like, how do we make that altruistic leap to a unified, collective action that turns things around, and that we actually start to go from this type of really win for only a few to something that wins for everyone?
I mean, I definitely experienced a lot of difficulty because I began to realize all of this like quite a while back. Like even when I wrote my first book, Breaking Up with the Head, that came out in 2002, I was also already very influenced by the destruction I saw when I went down to the Amazon in Ecuador, and just, recognizing that this kind of heedless pace of destruction was something that, was ultimately going to reverberate back. And in fact, just before we're talking now, but before we did this talk, I did a Zoom call with Atosa Sultani from Amazon Watch. And scientists are now saying that, there's, we're 1 to 5 to 15 years away, if we allow deforestation of the Amazon to continue, that the whole Amazon might begin to collapse as a functional system, which would be catastrophic for the global world, because the Amazon creates like 24% of the rain that circulates around the planet. I mean, it's like the hydrological heart of the planet. So, we're clearly hitting all these different tipping points, and we saw like these massive fires in Australia. I mean, so yeah, I mean, I've gone through different periods of being, taking the heaviness in, and just, but it's something about my peculiar, constitution is kind of built for this, like to hold on to like difficult ideas and try to find, to try to find some kind of coherence, in them.
I believe that's what we all need to do right now. Every one of us, we need to find some glimmer of capacity. I feel sometimes in my circles, there's people are in very unreal worlds of this is all love and light, and there's truth and realities to these higher dimensions. We've all penetrated these perfect dimensions where through medicine work, through meditation, through spiritual development, where we've penetrated the veil of this being as solid as we think it is, and we can enter these transpersonal experiences and then sometimes, or mentalize ourselves into training ourselves into thinking that that's the case. But that can sometimes chop our legs off from actually being active on the forefront of bringing real change on this planet because of our, if you will, our eternal seduction. You know, and I'm sure you circle around with folks that we would say their heads in the sky, or they believe in some imaginary savior that's going to turn everything around. How do we get what needs to be shared to friends like that who have a lot of altruistic, you know, imperative and drive and source, but they're sort of doing nothing, they're wobbling around.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have to, you know, I mean, everybody has to be forgiven and handled gently, because it's very difficult to figure out what to do, you know, that's actually productive when these problems are so big. You know, I don't know if anybody knows what to do really. You know, I mean, I admire all sorts of different movements that are trying, you know, whether it's Extinction Rebellion or Transition Town or 350.org, you know, but yeah, I mean, but yeah, there definitely seems to be kind of, you know, spiritual bypassing. People have these transcendent experiences that make them aware that on one level, you know, samsara is nirvana, that everything is perfect, and it's just exactly as it unfolds. This is like, you know, the dream that consciousness is having, that God wants us to be having. You know, this is the play that we're all enmeshed in. And yet, you know, and all of that is true, but it does feel to me that almost like, you know, if we're privileged, if we've been given, you know, good opportunities, you know, we have to also try to give back more. And I just feel, I mean, I personally just feel very sad about the amount of unnecessary misery, you know, that happens on Earth to animals, to plant life, and, you know, to people. And now, you know, that it's sort of like, you know, unneeded cruelty, you know, unneeded suffering, you know, for instance, now, you know, with these 30 million people who are unemployed, many of them, you know, don't have any money in their savings if they have to face a crisis. So they're all, you know, now made desperate. Whereas, you know, we live in a very wealthy system. We know there are people who are worth 100, $150 billion, you know. It really doesn't feel right that, you know, there should be such a inequality.
You know, there was this meme I saw of this fellow asking God, just sitting on a park bench, and he asked him, why is there famine and death and killing and cruelty and all these things on the planet? He's asking God, why do you allow this to happen? And then God looks at him and he says, I was wondering the same. And you know, my experience is that we are the hands of the transpersonal. We are the active agent, or the potential active agent of God, of the divine. And it's ascending as well as descending. It's like being a whole embodied being, I think, is a very powerful call right now, is to be active, and be active for the planet in whatever way, small way, big way, get involved in these particular movements that you've talked about. And I believe it's a time to build momentum. But what I want to ask you is this, from your experience, who are the people, where do we have to call, who and where and what are the power structures that are continuing this way of self-destruction? And where are they? Who are they? And how do we speak to them?
Right. Well, I mean, you know, so now we're seeing a lot of conspiracy theories and a lot of anger being directed at, you know, whether it's Bill Gates or Fauci or, you know, Hillary Clinton or whatever. But I think the more powerful analysis is a systems analysis. And just to recognize that, you know, kind of we created an economic system that was very effective in accomplishing certain goals, but it was ultimately very short term. It was focused on, you know, just material accumulation, you know, and there was a time, you know, maybe after the Second World War, when, you know, the decision could have been made to make life a lot easier for people. And now, all the factories could produce things, but instead they, created an economic model that required, planned obsolescence, false needs, artificial scarcities. So people actually had to work more and more. I mean, back in the 50s, an average couple, the man might work and the woman might be at home taking care of the kids. By the 80s, both parents were working, and they still didn't have as much as high a quality of life as that couple did in the 50s. So we've been caught in this kind of progress delusion, which the media really acts as an indoctrination mechanism. In my book, How Soon Is Now, as I said, I tried to kind of look at it from a social design perspective, and I saw like three big gears that are like turning each other, as the system works. And one of them is the technical infrastructure, the way we do agriculture, energy, industry, manufacturing. One of them is the social systems, the political systems, the governance systems, the economic and financial systems. And then the third area is the creation of consciousness, or the production of subjectivity in itself, which is done through media and education systems, and it really keeps people in a state of feeling like they need certain things, that they have to have establish certain status requirements. So if you're gonna deal with this system, you need to kind of deal with all three areas. So we would need to figure out what the alternative technical infrastructure is. Like, we know, for instance, that we need to go from big industrial agriculture back to smaller scale regenerative farming.
Yes.
Because one of the big problems we have is the depletion of topsoil, which is all about CO2 also. So essentially, regenerative farming techniques can store carbon back into the earth, but they require a lot more labor. On the other hand, we have so many people who are out of work right now because a lot of the jobs that they were doing are proving to be irrelevant, or robots can do them, or artificial intelligence can do them. So one of the things we would need probably to do would be to figure out how to get people back to the land, break up the industrial farms, retrain people to be stewards and permaculturists and biodynamic farmers, which would increase the yields of farms, and
the quality of the food we eat.
Yeah, exactly, and restore and replenish the soil. So that's like one big mission, that we would have to do. And even in that mission, there's all these different puzzle pieces. Like, we need a media that convinces people that this is valuable. That they're, because the whole 20th century, the 19th, 20th century, the whole messaging, modern industrial civilization was like, hey, get out of the rural areas. You're behind the times. You're going to move to the cities, get a job in marketing or in product development. It's much cooler and faster and slicker. So we created this illusion of progress that was the American dream in a way, and then every country in the world has jumped on board. I mean, even China, which is in some ways a very different mentality, like very totalitarian, in terms of its governance structure. They're still chasing the American dream. They've been building these mega cities and trying to like create a consumerist, paradise in a way, But that in itself, as we know in America and in the West, is not satisfying. It's kind of and that's why another piece of the puzzle is, kind of consciousness, spirituality, mysticism. And there we're also seeing, really amazing developments with the psychedelic movement and, people who are working in all these esoteric disciplines like Sufism or meditation or yoga. And we're recognizing that, having these types of experiences really restores meaning and value to people's lives, So yeah, so we can sort of see like all these elements of this next paradigm or this new paradigm, but we don't still quite know how to bring them together and kind of present them to the global community in a way that allows for rapid adoption.
I'm really glad that you shared that, because that's an area that some of the teams I'm part of are really developing and cultivating, but you've narrowed that down. The capacity to be able to educate and share and get the whole. the thing that we're doing, bringing this right back to home, is we have we have a dome, a growing dome here. My son's moved back through this whole COVID, isolation, and he's gone deep into going right back into the land. And the change in his being has been extraordinary. It's like he used to live in the city for the last year. His ratcheting down, his depth, his calmness. It's like he's a new being. And just in a matter of a few weeks, working with the land and then bringing me in and choosing and being with that. I'm not as much involved as him. But now we live in the countryside. We live in near farms. We're blessed to have that. And we decided to do that because we wanted to remove ourselves from the acidic, constant energy that machine of consumption keeps producing. And I believe that, yeah, as growing up as a suburbanite, growing up as a East Indian hardworking entrepreneurial family, coming more and more back into the roots with nature, it's shifting everything. No matter how much I've learned spiritually, meditated, being with the earth, growing vegetables, becoming self-resourceful by my own hands is like a type of nourishment that's like right to the core of being. So this is my invitation for everyone to start looking into that. How can you do that? Create permaculture with a little garden, a little plot, anything. But I believe that when we do, it's Gaia herself starts to inform us. We become more aware of our inherent symbiotic nature. And Daniel, that's what I feel is the essence of what the world problems are, is we have forgotten or we deny our symbiotic nature, that we are part of the whole. We work with the whole. We're healthy when we're taking into account you're taking into account me, we're taking into account the whole. We're aiming for the upliftment of all. And that means the Gaia herself, the land, the earth. And it's altruistic, but it's also a must. And it's also our true nature. Birds know how to make nests of their own. There's no manual, there's no teaching. It just happens. It's already built in. So I believe how to work with the land, how the land works with us is built in when we just give ourselves the risk to trust, to even make steps towards a more naturally oriented life.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really tried it myself yet, but I hear what you're saying.
Because my son, the
I get
last
it
2
theoretically.
years,
What's that? I mean, the other argument is that, often people who live in dense urban environments have a much smaller ecological footprint. So I mean, this type of transition has to be done, kind of intelligently.
yes.
Yeah. And, another idea is to make urban environments also more resilient with like rooftop gardens and, solar and all that kind of stuff.
Share with us your view of what's going on in the energy of the planet, the use of energy, where we should be going. Also, I'd like to hear your views on Michael Moore's movie. That's been getting some interesting flack.
Yeah, well, I figured you were alluding to that when you asked the question. I mean, I saw the Michael Moore movie and I read a few of the rebuttals to it. I think in a way it's there's an element of it that's positive, and that I do think there's a lot of greenwashing and Pollyanna kind of claims that renewable energy is going to save the world and that wind turbines and solar are just the answer. So I think it was and I've known from my own research that actually even these alternative energy systems do require a lot of fossil fuel inputs, and it's not totally clear, or it hasn't been, if the eventual output is much greater than the input of the fossil fuels. Apparently, though, there have been a lot of significant progress made in the last decade, and apparently a lot of the information in the Michael Moore film was about 8 years out of date. That actually now alternative energy systems, are having a much better, return, are much more sensible than they were even 8 to 10 years ago. However, it is a good question, since we're talking about really, curtailing fossil fuel use and then kind of ending it, do we really have any type of energy source that can allow for the same kind of civilization to continue? And at the moment we don't, unless we find free energy, or unless we were to, massively scale up nuclear, which, nobody wants to do and is very difficult to do. So then we would have to think about sort of a hybrid lifestyle where, we're not consuming as much, we're not traveling as much, we're relocalizing, food, we're repairing things that get broken. We're not just like replacing things, consumer items. So in a way, we'd have to go back to some of the type of social and technical practices that were normal in like the 19th century and earlier, where once again we just got totally hypnotized by this super speed, technological progress vision. And part of that idea is like, oh, you break your iPad, you throw it out, you get another one, but every iPad or phone is full of rare minerals and materials that are being mined from the earth at great cost, both human cost and human hardship and social cost. I mean, the conflict minerals, a lot of them come from regions of Africa that have like genocides of millions of people, because they're supplying these minerals to Apple and Samsung and so on. So yeah, it's that's been part of the problem, is this extractive system that we've developed really amputates us from seeing the effects of our causes. So it's all very downstream, or it's these kind of externalities that we don't connect. And so part of what we would have to do to move into a more right relationship with the planet would be to do away with these externalities and make these connections that we're missing between the products we buy and the companies we support and the results that happen all around the world that are often invisible to us.
I'm wondering what imprint is being made through this corona situation, because we are as a whole spending less. I'm sensing we're consuming less. We can see the direct effect on our environment. The environment is cleaning up and becoming pure and pure, only for a few weeks. But the problem is if we fire up the old engine again and we keep the engine running the way it was, everything that has been purified will be gucked up again. So what I'm hoping is that everyone listening and all of us collectively start to see that we cannot take away any argument around whether it's CO2 or not CO2 or global warming or climate change. But it's in front of us. Anyone and everyone can take a look that if we slow down consumerism, if we come back to more simplicity, we come back to home. There's a saying that all of the world's problems come from the inability to sit at home alone for a while. And I believe this is a really good time to reevaluate and to evaluate. How can I, as one of my mentors says, how can I have what I already want? So how can I want what I already have?
Yeah.
He used to say to me, when you want what you have, you'll have what you want. So look around. What do you have? Know that you got that, you acquired that, whatever small or large or big size, and want that. Get comfortable with enough and define your enough. I believe that's a very deep soul calling and invitation right now to really get clear of what is enough for fulfillment.
Yeah, that's been part of the trick of modern, capitalist society, is we always think there's going to be something better, like a new shiny thing, like a new festival, a new gadget, a new innovation, a new nightclub. So we have this idea in our mind that it's never enough, and that there's like this unfulfillment, that we want to find something, or we want a better job, or So that is, I think, something that this pandemic. A friend of mine just wrote a really great piece, which is going to come out in a couple of days, on Echo Hustler, called "May You Live in Interesting Times." Is the virus a vaccine for humanity? in that by forcing us to look at ourselves, maybe we're starting to peel away the falsity, of the society that we've been in. I mean, I would never have imagined that, for instance, the sporting world could come to a stop. In the US, it's such a dominant force in people's psyche, the NFL and the NBA, and it's such a, it's such a false reality that people get sort of stuck in. So, all these people put all of their time into sports or whatever, where are they putting their time in now? Like, are they actually having to think about existential questions about the nature of reality, about, who they are, what they've accomplished, what do they care about, I don't know. I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see what emerges from this crisis.
Do you have a sense where we're heading?
Yeah, I think that I don't think we're going to go back to normal. I think this is the beginning of a shattering of the system. And what's going to emerge in its place is going to be more local community based, experiments with mutual aid. People kind of like, there's a very good book by Rebecca Solnit called A Paradise Built in Hell, where she visited all these regions that had these big disasters. And she found out that mostly, instead of people like, acting like bandits or vandals or whatever, they actually really came together. And many people remembered it as the most, exalted time of their lives, where they really were the most human they'd ever been.
Wow.
So, yeah, I think that stuff like that could happen, that people will be forced to relate to each other differently, that new communities and societies will form. As there's probably a lot of death, a lot of breakdown. I mean, they're talking about really large scale famines right now, like because of the coronavirus, like 200, up from 150 million to like 250, 300 million people around the world are going to be threatened with serious famine. And even in the US, I wonder what's going to happen, because we have a very, very kind of restrictive social net here. And, a lot of very conservative right-wing governments, even in the States, like Nevada, for instance, the whole population is laid off, like in Reno and Las Vegas. They all worked in the casinos or in the hotels. You have hundreds of thousands of people who have no idea how they're going to survive. And we don't give away food easily. We don't have a lot of public facilities to help people. So, are we going to rise to the occasion, or are we going to let these people become kind of like marauding bands of desperados or something? I mean, I don't know. It's going to get very brass tacks. And I think it's also really going to challenge this kind of a neo-spiritual culture, that we've seen, where it's all about, your personal peace of mind and your equanimity. I've always felt that's kind of a limited form of spirituality, and I've always been more attracted to the Gandhi or the Martin Luther King idea that, it's not just about healing individually or you're from the inside or reaching this calmness. You then have to make use of that to, help humanity in some sense.
Oh,
Yeah.
Absolutely. I was, someone had questioned the other day on one of my posts about Greta, and saying she's inconsequential and blaming and shaming. And I was going, I don't understand why grown adults are worried about a teenager or put any attention. If you're not for her, she's a teenager. I wouldn't want anyone talking about my teenagers in a certain way. And the other piece is like, it's like, no, you look at Gandhi, and Gandhi went out of his way to educate people and to share with the common folk that, hey, listen, we can be free, but we need to have self-reliance first of all. We can't ask any particular leader of our country or colonizer to leave until we within ourselves find our own backbone and our own self-reliance and our own self-love and acceptance once again, and not seeing ourselves as less than. And the part of the whole practice of Gandhi was to let the world know this is what's going on here, to shame England into leaving. And so shame is not just something that can be how can I say, made spiritually wrong, by bringing awareness to injustice, by being willing to notice it oneself, own it and seeing it, that, and then not having not having tolerance for it anymore, individually and collectively saying we're not going to tolerate this anymore. We might not know what to do, but the energy of no longer tolerating anything less, or that's going to eventually end up in our own demise, in our own subjugation, our own, essence being crushed to the ground. I believe that's the other fire that all of us, this is the warrior side within all of us, that when we can stand and say what we will no longer accept, that wave will start to turn into a mature power, into a collective action, into a stand, like what happened look what happened in Iceland. Everyone just came up politely. There was no bloodshed, no war. And problem is very few people even know about that, what happened there. And so we don't have much examples of the collective coming together around wholeness and improving. It's usually through some calamity, through some challenge. But I hope we can change that. I hope we can have a new trajectory.
Yeah, I mean, on the other hand, we also have to realize that there's a sort of form of spirituality that's motivating, sort of the negative aspects of what's happening in the US. I mean, a lot of the people surrounding Trump are evangelicals who literally believe that, they want to accelerate the rapture and the apocalypse. And in Russia, some of Putin's advisors are the same. They have a sort of this Christian apocalypse idea that this is really the end of days. And so they're actually looking at everything, in those terms, and, wanting to, that's a form of madness that's very hard to figure out how to break. It's like a mind control spell. I guess sometimes if you consider that maybe like it's almost like a virus that's infected human consciousness with like Fox News and so on. I mean, sometimes the virus just has to like burn itself out. It's hard to figure out how to intervene right now. Although one interesting avenue, is turning out to be the psychedelic avenue in that, there's a lot more research being done on, psychedelics for trauma, PTSD, depression, anxiety, for really changing people's worldviews. As things get worse in the next 1, 3, 5 years, I wouldn't be surprised if we see more people embracing psychedelics as a avenue for accelerating human awakening and transformation.
I'm excited about that. It's, for many years, I was very, if you will, on the right-hand path of spirituality, purity, centeredness, yogic practice, warriorship practice, martial arts. And then one of my teachers, Stewie, this is years ago, I was in my 20s, and he said, you're really stuck up, come up, have a drink of this. And he took me into the forest of Ireland with a few other friends. And it was my first experience of magic mushrooms. And we went on a very profound journey. I'd been deeply immersed in meditative practices, but then this was like, no, this is not that. This is not Zen. This is not Kensho. It's its own dimension of inner exploration, awakening, and self-development, if you take it that way. If you go in with a good intention, there's so much to learn about oneself, to reorient life through. And so, everyone listening here, if you're of sound mind and heart, you're in a grounded place and you've never experienced this experiencing magic mushrooms, experiencing ayahuasca, experiencing these sacred plants in a sacred manner with very grounded and ethical and grounded guides is a very powerful journey to have. And it'll start to expand and bring in these higher realms that we've been sharing, and get us to understand that we are part of the earth plane, but it's going to go way beyond your mind. And I believe that this is an invitation that more and more of us have to share and experience what the earth plane, what Gaia already has for us, to get us reconnected to the Tao of how things actually are.
Yeah, I definitely feel that, like, when I started researching psychedelics, and I wrote my first book in 2002, there was definitely like a right-hand, left-hand path division. people who were into meditating would really like put down people who did psychedelics. Although generally nobody who did psychedelics put down people who meditated.
No.
So kind of like the condescension was one way.
Yes.
But more and more, I think people, even on the right-hand path have recognized that, psychedelics can have a great value for opening up people. I mean, a big theme of my work has been kind of initiation. And I mentioned that, the ecological crisis, this pandemic, these are types of initiation, for humanity as a collective. One thing we lost all around the world was, before modern civilization, all these indigenous and traditional cultures would take the young adults and put them through a process of initiation that usually involved vision quests, fasting, sun dances, walkabouts, or peyote or ayahuasca or mushrooms or whatever. And when the modern civilization developed, we didn't really believe in initiations anymore. Going back to the classical period, the mysteries of Eleusis were kind of like an initiation where people would go for a week and have this powerful experience together, maybe even take a psychedelic potion called the kykeon. When the church, when Christianity rose up in the 4th and 5th century, they outlawed these types of practices, and it became about indoctrination instead of initiation, like controlling people's minds through belief systems and so on. I really like Joseph Chilton Pearce, this author, wrote a book called The Biology of Transcendence, and he talks about how initiation is not really just a cultural phenomenon. It may actually have a neurophysiological function, like a biological function in the brain, where, because of the way we've developed in the last few 100,000 years, we developed the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain which makes us human, which allows us to use language and plan for the future and have abstract thoughts and so on. But it also has the tendency to separate us and lock us into this kind of individuated ego consciousness. And then we actually require like a transpersonal experience or visionary experience to break out of that egoic consciousness. For these indigenous cultures, you wouldn't really be considered a full mature adult unless you'd done that, unless you'd had those types of experiences. And it wasn't just having experiences, you also then needed the elders who would have the role of kind of like explaining what your visions meant, how they relate to the stories and myths of the tribe. And they would kind of like gently place you back into the culture, and that's, I think, one of the problems we've had is like now in the last 30 years or 40 years, since the 60s, people go out on these initiatory journeys, but there isn't really like a coherent cultural framing for them for what to do about that. And because we're such an individualistic culture and such a materialist culture, even these initiatory experiences get kind of melded back into a kind of more limited idea of like personal healing or personal journeying or something, rather than this idea that somehow once you've had this transpersonal awakening, then you really have to be responsible and in service for the collective as a whole, And then ironically, we see people like, Trump or Boris Johnson as Bolsonaro, and they're like the epitome of men who've never gone through like transpersonal experiences or totally lived like locked into their egoic state, using their cunning and creativity to maximize their winning advantage in power structures,
Yeah, after doing medicines, and you go deep into that dimension, it's really hard to remain like that. It's really hard not to recognize and appreciate our unity, our relationship, that there's an actual oneness between us. And it's not just some metaphysical idea, but it's a tacit recognition that we have different looks and feels and ways of living life, but we can find the congruence. It deepens. I was very, very fortunate to have initiation experiences growing up in a martial art culture where there was tests and trials and tribulations. There was character tests, constant character tests and support. There was wonderful mentorship. And I believe these virtues and these avenues and these gold mines, these gems are still here. And anyone who's yearning to have that initiation that perhaps they never had, that they're yearning inside ourselves. There's so many men's groups, there's women's groups, there's groups of people who are doing initiations to bring us back to the earth. And I really, encourage anyone who's never had that, go through this deep experience of a ritual encounter with your very self, whatever tradition, whatever medicine plant journey, whatever shamanic dive that you take, but seek it. Because when you're really ready and yearning, as they say, the teacher shows up. Also be discerning. Don't just go for anyone. Also be discerning, but really allow any part of you that's been yearning to go into the depth of who you are, to discover more of your being, to integrate lost parts, and ultimately, I feel, to become a warrior for the planet, a sage, an active arm of the betterment of this planet. Then it's a necessity to allow yourself to bring yourself into initiation, whatever form, but it'll show up when you're ready and you want to.
That's great, Sachin. I'm wondering if maybe we should stop there for tonight. It's a little bit later here in Vienna. I'm getting a little bit tired. I've done a bunch of Zoom today, but I loved catching up with you. It's great to see you as always. Hope we get to hug in person one of these days.
You betcha, brother. Listen, please, is there anything, how can folks get in touch with you, find out about your books?
Oh, sure. I mean, I'm on Facebook. They can follow me here. I have a new web magazine we just started called liminal.news. The books are on Amazon. How Soon Is Now, Breaking Open the Head, 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl. When Plants Dream is the latest one that was written with a woman anthropologist, Sophia Rocklin, really, really about ayahuasca. And that's I guess, that's the way it is. That's what's happening. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Daniel, for hanging out with us tonight. All right. We'll see you soon, bud.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, much love, man.
Ciao, ciao.